Hello guys, welcome back once again in checkpoint tutorial, and today we are going to cover high availability. So high availability is basically HA configuration, we call it as a, or we can say redundancy, right? Means that if your firewall goes down, is still how you can set up a scenario where your services will not be impacted, right? So obviously if one of the firewall goes down and if you still want your services to be running, then we need one more firewall to be in that scenario, right? So let me just open the diagram that I have a lab setup for that. So that will just clearly tell you the picture that how basically it is like. So this is one of the example here. Yeah, that's fine. So this is just one of the example here. I have taken two firewall gateway. This is the gateway 1, this is the gateway 2, right? And this will be our manager which will be managing these two firewalls, and our inside traffic is this way. This is our inside traffic, and this side is our outside, right? So in the HA cluster I have taken two firewalls, this one. So in the HA cluster we are having the two types of modes where we can configure it. One of the type is active, and another type is active standby. So although most of the things are very much clear from the name, that in active scenario, our both the firewalls, this gateway 1 and gateway 2, means both the firewalls will be active and the traffic will be passing through both of the firewalls. While in active and standby mode, one of the firewall, let us suppose this one is going to be an active one, and this will be just monitoring the traffic and to be on standby. So this is just a deployment type, that how you can deploy the firewalls. If I talk about the production environment, active standby mode is preferred if a really large environment, large production environment. Then active standby scenario is preferred, because in case of active scenario, the configuration becomes little complicated, or we can say that traffic troubleshooting, that on which way, because both of the firewalls will be active. So whenever we initiate the traffic, so it will becomes quite difficult whether it is passing through this firewall or it is going through this firewall, right? So that becomes like little difficult, and so that's why most of the large production environment or the enterprise, they prefer active standby. So if I talk about the working scenario, then how it is, let us suppose how we basically configure, right? Because this to be let us suppose this is going to be a 192.168.1.1 IP address which is residing in our computer. Or we can say if there is a large environment, then we can say this is our network, and this symbol what I have taken as a basically a router, that should be a switch, basically that is a switch basically, but the symbols seems like a router, so just ignore that and just take it as a switch, okay? Or let me just blur it, so you take it as a switch. Basically this is a switch, so I will take the functionality of a switch only. Why I have taken this one? Because this is a basically L3 switch, so it has both the functionalities L2 and L3, but I will be taking help of only as a switch, right? And now On this gateway 1 we will be having another one IP address. Let us suppose we take as a 192.168.1.50 here and 1.51 IP address here, correct? So these two IP addresses, these are the residing on the firewall 1.50 and 1.51. Let me write the complete 192.168 1 dot, and this is 192. That's, I think, okay. So now it is our on computer, right? This is the monitor. Now we have to find that on which will be the gateway of our computer, whether I should define the gateway 1.50 or I should decide 1.51, correct? Because you have to set only one gateway here in the computer, because whenever it is initiating the traffic, that traffic will be either initiated by going this way or it is going to be this way. So which one I have to configure in my computer as a default gateway? So that has been sorted out by our concept of cluster. Okay, so what we do, we make these two firewalls in a cluster, and we get a virtual IP to this cluster. Okay, this will be having a virtual IP which will not be residing in any of the firewalls, either in gateway 1 or in gateway 2, but that is basically a virtual IP. It could be any of the IP address. Let me take one example as a 192.168.1.254. So in this scenario, let us say this is our virtual IP and that is the virtual IP of the cluster. So that will be somewhere here flying 254. Now we will configure this 254 IP as a default gateway on this machine 192.168.1.254. Fine. Now this computer here or any user here, he will initiate the traffic or send the traffic to the default gateway as 1.254. Okay, now this 1.254 is the virtual IP of this cluster. Now it's the responsibility of our cluster that it will decide that whether traffic to be sent on gateway 1 or gateway 2. If it is an active standby mode configuration, then cluster should be aware that where I have to forward that traffic. So now the cluster has to be aware that which of the firewall is active right now, right? Because in some scenario it is the case like this firewall goes down and the traffic is flowing through this one, or this firewall goes down and the traffic is going through this one. So every time the cluster, whatever the cluster is, normally a hypothetical scenario or environment, but still that should be aware that which of the firewall is active. So how it comes to know? That takes the help of basically GR. We call it as a get it yourself. So what happens basically that these firewall are continuously sending GARP, or we can say the get it to us ARP reply, even nobody is requesting, but still they are sending this to cluster gateway, right? Cluster gateway means there's 254. They are continuously sending, and that's how this our cluster is aware that which of the firewall is active, right? So if any of the firewall goes down, let us suppose gateway 2 goes down, it will stop sending the GR. Now in that case our cluster will come to know, okay, we are not getting this one GR from that one, it means, and we are getting GR from this one, it means that this gateway 1 is active, and now it will redirect our traffic to this way, right? So that's how the traffic is being sent to the firewall, and now that firewall will further forward the traffic. Now another part is that how this is the one case where the firewall just goes down. What happens that if this link goes down, right? So this is just like a concept of monitoring the traffic. It is just monitoring the link as well, all the links. So it will monitor this link. If this link goes down, or this link goes down, or this complete firewall goes down, in that case the traffic will be shifted to another firewall, and this is controlled by our cluster XL. It is like we can say the cluster control protocol, CCP we can say, which just manages that where to forward that traffic based on the monitoring of firewall and monitoring the links, and this things can be done via cluster XL. So whenever you go to the configuration, there are two options for the configuration. Either you can take help of the cluster XL, or you can configure as a VRRP. So although this cluster XL works like a VRRP, if you are sound in networking, you might be aware of the VRRP, that how VRRP works. So cluster XL is also having the similar functionality as our VRRP, that if one of the router goes down, the traffic will be forwarded to the another one. The same thing is done to the cluster XL, and the decision is like CCP is like, you know, our own type of things. Like Checkpoint they have developed their own set of protocols that is called as a cluster XL, and that is taking the decisions that to which firewall will be active and which firewall will be standby, and based on that decision traffic is being forwarded from the cluster, right? So this was the up to the scenario that we learned that how the traffic is forwarded. Now you will be having the question, then what is the use of this link? So this is basically a sync interface. Okay, sync interface means this is transferring or sending the hello packets just to know that another firewall is active or not, right? If the by default timers, I think this is in some milliseconds, or I think in seconds, I don't exactly remember. I will just check whether we will see that one, whether during the configuration. So what happens, but I remember that whatever the hello timer is there, and the reply of there's a hold down timer, and that is 3 times of that one. So normally, as I remember, it was I think 1 second, but I'm not sure. Hold down timer, and the 3 second will be our hold down timer. It means each and every 1 second it is sending a hello packet, and if it is missing 3 consecutive reply of those hellos, then it will decide then another peer is dead. It will declare as dead, and it will become an active, right? So normally, let us suppose this is an active standby scenario. It is sending hello every second. So it send 1 hello, it does not get reply, it is still hold on, although this is an active, right? So let us okay, this will be sending, and if it is again sending 1 more hello, again it is not getting reply, it sent 1 more reply, hello message, and if it is not getting reply, it will declare that the standby device is dead, right? It will declare that link down and everything is fine. And now what will be the scenario once this comes up? Like if it declared that this was the scenario, right? It is declared that this is dead. It have stopped communicating with this one, it stopped sending to the hello. Now what happens? Let us suppose you logged on to the firewall, you observed some anomalies on that one, you found some problem, and you get it back. Now how will this firewall come to know that this has come up, right? So for that case, whenever any of the firewall, either this active one or standby one, whenever it comes powered on, by default it remains in active state and sends an hello message. So by default, it's a responsibility of the active firewall to send the hello message. But if any of the firewall got rebooted or it is had just joining the cluster, then it will initiate the hello message as well. So now it receives the hello message. It compares the priority, that who is going to be active or standby, or normally if the preemption is off, right? If preemption is off, I will tell you what is preemption is. If preemption is off, so what will happen, that it is active, so it will remain active, and this will be declared as a standby because it was receiving a standby. So now this firewall or gateway 1 has come to know that gateway 2 has joined that cluster once again. It is functioning properly now. So now if this goes down, I can send the traffic to the another one, or I can fail over to another. Now I was talking about the preemption, right? So preemption is like a feature that if any of the firewall goes down, let us suppose we were working on the scenario when the firewall 1 was active and gateway 2 was standby. If any of the problem occurs in gateway 1, this is problem occurs in gateway 1 and that goes down, right? Now what will happen? This becomes active by default because that was in the cluster and that was standby. So as by default it will be active, and another which was having problem, that has gone down. Now you logged on that firewall, you troubleshooted, and you found some problems or the power supply issue or whatever it was, and you corrected it. You made the firewall up once again. Now what will happen, that whatever the firewall is active, that will remain active if preemption is off. But if the preemption is on, it means that whatever the firewall was active earlier, after joining the cluster, it will be active once again, right? You got that? If the preemption is off, it means that whatever has been active, that will remain active. But if it is on, the active has the standby has become active, but as the active one earlier will join that cluster, it will shift back to the active one, right? Earlier from standby it became active, but it's like earlier or let me take scenario like this. Let us suppose this is active, this is a standby. Okay, once let us suppose the preemption is on. So if this firewall goes down, this will be active and this will be dead. Once this joins back, the issue has been resolved on that one, that active will be shifted again here and that will be declared as a standby. So this is like a preemption on. Whenever this is preemption off, it means that whatever it is has been gone. Let us suppose it was active earlier, this was standby, this has gone down, this has become active, but even if this join, this will be working as standby. Whatever is active, that will remain active. This is like a preemption is off. Okay, I hope that's clear now. If you still not sure, you can watch put it back and just watch it again, otherwise I will just miss a lot of time, right? Another thing is like a failover type. Whenever the traffic like this firewall goes down here and the traffic is being shifted to this firewall, so there are two type of failure. That one is stateful failover and another type is stateless failover. So stateless means that let me first explain stateful. Whatever the traffic was traveling through this gateway 1, let us suppose this is active and this is standby. Whatever the traffic was traveling through the gateway 1, it is having some of the connections, right? Connections means that whatever the traffic is being continuously sending, we are having some session setup, right? So these connections are being connection table is prepared on this gateway 1. Whenever we configure this failover to be a stateful, the same connection table is to be shared on the standby firewall. Means that whatever the connections are running on gateway 1, at the same time they are being sent to the gateway 2 using this sync interface, so that they remain in the gateway 2. Either, although the gateway 2 is not sending the traffic, but still it is having the information that what are the connections are being set up on the gateway 1. Why? Because if this firewall goes down, this gateway 2 has the information that whatever the connections are running in gateway 1. So this users here, they don't have to create a new connection in order to send the traffic. They are seamless. They are sending the traffic seamless. In case of stateful, whatever the connection is here, they are continuously being sent to the gateway 2. So this interface, sync interface, this is basically sending the config plus connection table. Config means that whatever the config changes you are doing in the firewall, these are also being synchronized using this interface. This is called sync interface to the gateway 2. And if they are configured in the stateful failover method, then the config and connection both will be shared. What happens in the if you have configured in the stateless? So if you have configured in the stateless, then it will not be sending the connections. It will be sending only config. In that case, the connections will not be here. Failover happens. Gateway 2 don't have the information that whatever the connections are running in gateway 1. As a result, let us suppose if any of the user was using a bank log on, right, his connection will be interrupted. Now if the traffic has been shifted to another firewall, he has to create a new connection. It means that he has to set up a new login, username and password. He has to log on and set up the connection. Or if you have, let us suppose you have downloading a file using FTP and your 80% file was transferred or 90% file was transferred, and by chance this firewall goes down, then you have to download that traffic once again. That 90% will be lost. It will be, you will be initiating a new connection from this one, and it will start from zero once again. So that's what is the disadvantage of stateless. So in most of the production environment, we are having this stateful failover. Means that from this sync interface, we are transferring config plus connection, right? So that was about the theory, that how the HA works. Another thing is, let me tell you for the little bit VRRP. So in the new all, I think above R75 release, I think most of the checkpoint firewalls are using cluster Axel. But if you talk about the old firewalls, they were running the VRRP. So in that case, what will happen? You will create a virtual router from Gaia portal. You will configure the priority, virtual IP in both of them, virtual router, priority, and obviously that's whenever you are configured the VRRP, then you have some ID as well, right? So that you have to give. And yeah, I think that's it about the VRRP, and I'm not going to explain more that what VRRP is actually, but if you know, then you can configure it. And for here in the configuration, whatever the lab session I am going to tell you, I will be configuring the cluster Excel, which is the proprietary of checkpoint, and that is in the trends now. And most of the in fact the enterprise are using this cluster Excel, right? So what I am going to do here, that I will be configuring whatever the lab you are observing here, but I'm just going to tell you that what are the IP addresses I'm going to use here. So in this machine I'll be using IP address 192.168.1.100. No, 1.1. Let me clear it. Let me write it here. Okay, I think I can add label, right? Yeah. So 192.168.1.1. that should be somewhere here, and for this I will be using the default gateway. This will be the machine IP. Okay, and the default gateway of this one will be whichever I was talking about, the cluster IP, right, or the virtual IP. So that will be 192.168.1.254. that's what we are going to configure. And this gateway here, that will be having IP address 192.168.1.50. Copy it, duplicate, and that should be 51. And manager I am going to configure as .100. Okay, and this side I'm going to configure .20.0.0.1. Okay, this will be the IP address of this interface. Duplicate it, and this side I am going to configure as 20.2. and the virtual IP, that should be 20.0.254. okay, and I will be having one virtual we can say the loopback IP address. That should be, let's say, is 20.0.0.100. okay. Okay, so for that one, it is going quite small, so either I will take the loopback here, or I will perform a given IP to this interface or any of the interface, and then we will give like a default route to point it back to this 0.254. We will see that configuration part in the coming section. Okay, so how much time we are having? We have passed around 30 minutes. So let's just see that how we are going to add the manager here. Okay, so I'm just starting this machine. I don't want to make this session quite large, so I will break up it in two parts. So smart console, so I'm going to log on to manager here, right, and the manager is .100 192.168.1.100. so I have configured this gateway as a manager. I think that we have done so many times, so that's nothing new here. that should be 100. The password I have admin123. You can also use the same password, or you can configure something else as you wish, but I normally prefer admin123 because that's easy to remember in all the labs, but not in the bank. Okay. Just don't think that I'll be using same password in my bank account as well, admin123. You should try to crack that. That's not possible. You cannot crack that. It takes time, guys. I'm not on mute. So I don't want to skip that part. I just want to actually show you that how much time does it take. So currently we are having this manager 192.168.1.100. So there are two things to make a cluster. Either you can make a cluster and add, while creating the cluster, you can add those gateways in that one, or you can add gateways first in this and then make them as a cluster. So both the ways are possible. I'm going to make a cluster first. Okay, and during creating the cluster I will add one of the firewall, and for the second one I will add the firewall gateway or the firewall first, and then I will add it into the cluster. Okay, so let us say this is our cluster. Okay, so I will prefer the classic mode here, adding it. This is like similar adding a gateway. I think we have done in the previous sessions if you have closely monitoring those. And general properties, this is the name. So let us suppose give it the name as a cluster HA. IP address we can give 192.168.1.254. okay, and cluster XL is enabled here. If it is not enabled, then please enable it. Okay, if you do not enable it, it is not going to work. What are the cluster members? So we don't have any cluster members as of now, so I will add it here as a new cluster member, or add existing gateway. So if it is a new cluster members, means that it is not existing, we have not added that gateway in our manager. But if it is already added, you can choose this option, add existing gateway. So we don't have any members as of now, so I will click this new cluster member. Right, so let me give it the name gateway 1. Fine. IP address I was having 192.168.1.50. Another thing is SIG communication. So I will set up the SIG communication, the same password of what I have configured on the gateways. So while initial setup I have given the password Cisco 123, so same thing I am going to give it here and initialize the communication. Trust is established. I will close this one and put it OK, and we will see one of the gateway is added. Okay, Another thing, like these were about the cluster members. Next thing is our cluster XL and VRRP, right? So I was talking about that we are having an option that whether you want to choose the cluster XL or you want to use as a VRRP. So I'm going to use as a cluster XL, but if you are confident enough to configure VRRP or your enterprise is using VRRP in older firewalls or other firewalls, you can choose VRRP or based on your requirement. Okay, so this is cluster XL. You have multiple options. So when we are talking about the high availability means active standby mode. Load sharing means we can share the load between two firewalls, while in the active means that both of the firewalls will be active. So you are having an option that whatever you want to, in the cluster, how your gateways will be configuring, right? Or how do you want to be working in the actual environment. Track changes and status of the cluster members. So obviously, yes, we want to log them, but if you want to send them as a pop-up alert, you can configure it, or if you want to configure as a mail alert, so in that case you have to configure the mail alerts at where these mail alerts will be sent, right? Or as an MP trap alert. So it's just basically like your requirement, right? That how you're into, because some of the times we need that if any of the things is happening, like from HA status is being changed, so please send a pop-up alert or email, or if you are using any NMS, so send those send these alert to those monitor, so that any of the monitoring team can just raise these concern and you can troubleshoot further that why this failover has occurred. Either one of the firewall is gone down or any unusual things happening, right? So this time I'm just going to log it. Use state synchronization, right? That's what I was talking about, the stateful or stateless failover. So if we check this, use state synchronization, it means that we want the stateful failover. If you uncheck it, it means that it will going to be stateless, right? So here I am having that use state synchronization, it means that it will be stateful. So after every 3 seconds it will be sending the synchronization connections to the another firewall. So another option is use virtual MAC, or you don't want, it's just totally on your choice, right? Another options are like network management. These are quite older ones, what we used to see, that get interface configuration. We will come back to it just after some time. Okay, and this is just like NAT hide internal networks behind the gateway. If you want to enable it, you can enable it. If you don't want, you just keep it as it is, right? So these are options you can explore as per your requirement. As of now, I don't need it here, so I'm not going to configure it here. Okay, so this is the main URL it is saying to log on to that one, so that is fine. I don't have any issues with that one. IPsec VPN, if you want to configure it, if you don't want, it's just totally on your choice, right? So these are basically like office mode is basically for the remote access VPN, so we are not going to detail on that one, right? But it's just totally on the requirement. If you want to configure it, you can configure it, because our requirement will be fulfilled from here as of now. So I'm going to click it OK, and I will come back to this cluster XL, and again once again, no interfaces are defined. Topology information must be configured in order to use anti-spoofing feature. Are you sure you want to continue? Yes, as of now I want to continue. Is it gone? Yes. So now it has created one cluster, right? And inside that cluster we are having one gateway 1, but we have to add another one, gateway 2. So I'm going to add as a normal gateway here. I'm not going to cluster, I'm not going to create a new cluster here. I will add new gateway and add that gateway to the cluster. Okay, so I'm going to the classic mode again. Name I'm giving as a gateway 2. IP address it was having 192.168.1.51. I think you remember, right, these IP addresses 192.168.1.50, 192.168.1.51. so the same IP address I'm giving here. Now it comes to the SIC, so I have to set up the SIC communication. Fine, let's initialize it and put it OK. Fine and OK. So now it will add a new gateway, right? So you see that this gateway 2 has been added now, but this gateway 2 is not part of that cluster HA as of now, right? So in the normal way, right, we can add whichever is not part of that cluster, we can add that gateway to the cluster. How we can add it? Just double click on this cluster HA, go to the cluster members, and now we are going to use another option, add existing gateway, right? So we have having a gateway, so that is just available, gateway 2. I will click OK. It will give some errors that if you add gateway to the cluster, it will be converted to the cluster member. Some settings will be lost. Which of these one? The following setting will remain. SIC, I just really want that one. If SIC communication is lost, then we are totally lost. And the VPN will be lost, no problem. NAT except for IP pool. So I have not configured any of these, so no problem, I can cater it. But if you are doing it in the production environment, then you have to take care of these things, that whenever we are moving from gateway to the cluster members, you may have to lose these configuration, right? So just take care while doing in the production environment. Obviously you need a proper planning when you do it in the production. The following products are installed in cluster HA but not on the gateway to VPN 1 power. I have not configured anything. So that's how our gateway 2 is added. Now gateway 2 is also, you see that gateway 2 is also part of that cluster now. I click it OK here. You have defined gateway's encryption domain using its valid address, but you have not defined these addresses. Define valid addresses by writing the interface and then I will do it. Okay. It will not allow me to do it. Fine, I think it has not added because of some IP address configuration. Let me try to add it once again. So I go in the network management tab, get interfaces without topology or with topology. There's no issues with that one. With or without topology, yes. So 50 is available here, but I don't see 51. So either we have lost the SIG communication with that or something. No, it's okay, right? 50 and 51 both are okay. That's fine. That should be okay now. Still not okay, no problem. I will configure it. I wanted to do it later on, but they want us to do it now. So I will just overwrite, and that has to be network defined interface for the Ethernet 0. That's fine. Perform anti-spoofing, that's okay. Security zone, that's okay, fine. Let's see if it is still throws this error. That is private as of now. Let's see if it is gives this error. Yes, it is still giving. I think I'm missing something. Still no problem. I'm suspecting that this is why, because another interfaces, right? Let me show you. The another interfaces are not configured, so that might be throwing these errors because of that. So no problem, I will just not going to extend this session quite long, because we have to do a lot of things. As of now we have to configure this router as well, so I'm going to cover that in the next session, or if it is okay. So let's hold on as of now.